Hi, everyone. I know you're excited. The Rhino Hi-Fi's next album to be released as you're watching this video. I'm going to bring in a special guest, new to the Audiophile Roundtable, Senior Director of A&R for Rhino, Mr. Jason Jones. Jason, what do you got for us? The next
Hey,
Rhino Hi-Fi is?
never mind the bollocks. Here's the Sex Pistols.
There we go. I know this is an album that is close to your heart. This is your first time on the show. Probably I'd like to introduce you to the viewers. What do you do at Rhino?
Well, as you said, I'm Senior Director of A&R at Rhino. I produce reissues. Some of the catalog reissues that probably some of your fans and viewers have potentially heard from me are the replacements. I've done the whole replacements archival series, Little Feat, Van Halen, Talking Heads, Ween, amongst countless others.
And anyone that's watching is going to go, some of those should be on Hi-Fi as well. Come on, Jason, get them on Hi-Fi.
You never know. You never know, is what I'll say.
So in my hands, I'm holding the latest Rhino Hi-Fi, 1977. It originally came out in the UK. And then, of course, Warner Brothers in the US. I guess it was on the Virgin Records label, if I'm not
There's a
mistaken.
Virgin in the UK, Warner Brothers in the US.
Right.
Yeah.
So that means, and I'll just show everyone that watches likes to see the tape box. So this would mean this would be the US tape that's used for this record.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
That's what I'm showing right there.
It's a flat master that we have that was delivered to us in 1977 by Malcolm McLaren's production company, Glitterbest. Yeah, it's
October 12th, 1977. It says right there on the box.
Correct.
And then we have liner notes. Who's the gentleman that wrote the liner notes?
Chris Thomas, the producer of Nevermind the Bollocks, also famously worked on the Roxy Music catalog, or Roxy Music.
And
so used to talking about catalog in the catalog world. Roxy Music worked with
Elton John.
With Elton John. He's a legendary producer. Legendary.
On top of the producer, the engineer himself.
Bill Price.
An all-star team, I would think, back in its day, right?
Well, it really set a groundwork for, what would be punk and the new wave. I think it's, Bill Price did extraordinary work with the Clash. He's one of my favorite engineers, truly.
So with this record, why is this punk record a hi-fi record then? Why did Rhino make it a hi-fi? And that's going to be one of the questions that's asked. Why is Rhino doing punk hi-fi? I mean,
well, I will say it is, as part of the hi-fi series, we're trying to touch important records.
Right.
I think that, and I would count this as one of the most important records ever.
And I was going to ask you that too, right? Because I was like, do you consider this, and we've talked about this before we went on, is this like considered a definitive punk rock record of its time? Was this it? And I mean,
it's one of them.
I
think it's one of them. I think that there's countless records that you could put in there. You could put the first Ramones record in there. You could put the first Clash record in there. You could put the first Damned record in there. If you want to touch LA punk, you could talk about X and the Germs. It doesn't just, one of the best things about punk is that in its essence, it should not limit itself. It should be expansive.
Well, I mentioned at the top, it came out in 1977. This album, when it dropped, it was absolute chaos. The title alone caused police raids, obscenity charges, store managers getting arrested, I believe. The BBC banned the singles. The tabloids went crazy, and it went straight to #1 on the UK chart. So controversy sells.
Very much so. And, it's something where, watching punk documentaries whenever I was a kid, there was a great PBS documentary series about kind of the history of rock and roll. It's not the history of rock and roll series, but it's called Rock and Roll. And the punk episode, which is really was a really impactful piece of media for me as a kid. It talked about how the number one single for the week was just a black line because the papers refused to print the name of God Save the Queen and the Sex Pistols. It's, there's a lot of controversy around them, which a lot of it is due to just them being themselves.
Right.
But also, their manager was very much in tune with the fact that the media wants sensational things to talk about.
Of course, it sells
And
tabloid papers,
yeah,
doesn't it?
it does. It does. But it was also something where, there's a lot of violence against the band. Paul Cook was assaulted, John Lydon was assaulted. It's just, there's a lot of people who really didn't like what this band stood for or what they represented. And of course, I was like a moth to a flame whenever I discovered them.
Yeah.
I heard that record for the very first time when I was 10 years old on cassette, no less. It completely blew my mind. Completely blew my mind.
So
You can see the look in my eye in my like class photo from like 4th grade to 5th grade. Whenever I discovered this record, I was a totally different person. It's been a record that has meant so much to me, and it's a perspective. It contains a perspective on life and DIY ethics and so much, of what punk means. It's still a part of me today.
So controversy sells clearly. Now, it was a pretty production. The production was pretty polished, and we talked about who produced it. It was Chris Thomas who produced Roxy Music, and of course Elton John. We had engineer Bill Price. Now I'm holding up the record. It was mastered by Kevin Gray, cut by Kevin Gray from the original analog tapes. The vinyl's pressed at optimal. Now, how does Rhino preserve that balance? Like, how did you hear this record when you got your own from Rhino compared to what you were listening in the past?
Well, when I got the test pressing, we have a certain sound stage here where we
Yep.
audition things and listen to it. I just turned it up really loud and just let it consume me. It was, because as we all know, the work that Kevin does is stellar,
Yep.
extraordinary, and to have his ears on this record was a really exciting thing. It was really exciting to me.
And what I heard, because I heard it, I turned it up loud because this is a record. If anyone's watching, you got to turn this one up loud because that's what it's there for. But it is a loud recording. It's this cut, I should say, is loud. It's polished, I would say. It's punchy. It's really contrary to like punk's lo-fi style almost. It actually has a hi-fi sort of sound to it. Would you agree with that? That's what I heard.
There are certain hallmarks of Chris Thomas's production that are a part of this. The drum sound itself. Whenever I first kind of got into dissecting the record and dissecting Chris Thomas as a producer, listening to Country Life by Roxy Music, I was like, oh, this is a lot of the techniques that were used on Nevermind the Bollocks are, part and parcel of the work he did as a producer for Roxy Music. And Steve Jones and Paul Cook were obsessed with Roxy Music and were only so.
And there's not one bad sounding Roxy Music record. I mean, those guys
correct
recorded and produced those one brilliantly.
Yeah.
So Sid Vicious, we all know Sid Vicious made a name for himself clearly, but a lot of folks probably don't know this. He was barely on the record, Jason. Who played bass?
Steve Jones plays bass on pretty much the entire record. There's one track where includes the original single version of Anarchy in the UK, which originally had Glenn Matlock on bass.
Right.
That's pretty. Everything else is pretty much Steve Jones.
We'll bring it back because they had sacked Glenn Matlock prior to the recording of this record, or like right before. So
He was fired in, I believe, January of
January? Okay.
1977. It was after a Scandinavian tour. Then they got sit in, and he kind of, there's a bit of rattling of him on bodies, but that's also was overdubbed.
Right.
Steve is playing bass on that record, so that's Steve Jones, amazing guitarist, very great bassist as well.
I like what Chris Thomas says about this in the liner notes. He's like, I got Steve to double track his guitar, right?
Hmm.
Same as on Anarchy, placing one to the left and one on the right with the bass in the middle. And then they used a harmonizer, one of the guitars placing on the top of the bass to glue everything together, because the inherent time delay in the harmonizer, we recorded at half speed to reduce the delay by half. So
Yeah,
they were doing trickery in the studios. It wasn't just,
sure.
it wasn't
Yeah,
just this live, it wasn't just this, okay, guys, just play it and go. I mean, this is pretty cool. That was
it's
some
a
interesting production.
it's a way more sophisticated record than you would think.
And I did not know that until I read these notes.
Yeah, yep, yep. No, it's a pretty sophisticated record, which is why it made sense for it to be a part of the Hi-Fi series.
I'm understanding it now, because when I first heard it was coming, I'm like, Sex Pistols, a
Oh yeah,
hi-fi.
but it's also been a record that's been requested by members of the community, of the audiophile community, as something that we should, you know, potentially include as a part of the
And
series.
I agree, right? Because the record is raw, power, has attitude. Anarchy in the UK, God Save the Queen, Pretty Vacant, and Holidays in the Sun. Those songs shook the UK. They really did. It to its core at the time. It was one of those times, 1977. It defined punk as a global movement, and Sid Vicious became the face of the Pistols, didn't he? Most of his bass wasn't his, but he became the face of
I would
the
ar- I
band.
would
Crazy.
argue that John Lydon, formerly known as Johnny Rotten,
Yep.
he is you know he is a lot of the spirit of that band. Paul Cook, Steve Jones, Glenn Matlock, they are also a heavy part of the spirit of that band. Currently touring as and performing Nevermind the Bollocks to uh, fans worldwide as a part of the tour that they're doing right now. So it's a record that still means a lot to a lot of people, and we're only so fortunate that they were on board for us to reissue it as part of this series.
So some of the themes of this record, when you had anti-establishment themes, rebellion themes, anger at the institution, anger at the government, right? And then of course at the monarchy, God Save the Queen,
Yeah, I mean,
right?
those are pretty angry times. England
No
was
kidding.
pretty dire at that time. There was a years long trash strike. So it's like, one of the things that John Lydon has said in the past is, you walk by and you see the garbage, where the garbage, confront the issue, make the issue uh, more out in the open rather than it being talked about and whispered about in hushed tones. There was a lot of dissatisfaction amongst the youth of England at that time, and a band like the Sex Pistols were the voice and the sound of the disaffected.
Hmm. That's a good way to describe that. I like that. Are we getting back? I mean, this is a lot of the viewers are audiophiles, so if they're just
Sure.
joining in right now, they're probably saying Sex Pistols, hi-fi. But I mean, does the way this is cut, the way Kevin mastered it, does this enhance or soften the punk, this record's raw edge,
Oh,
you feel?
enhances it.
Exactly. That's what I'm
There's
hearing.
no way. There's no way. This is not a Debbie Boone record. This is a
Pl-
Sex Pistols
Play
record.
it loud, folks. Play it loud.
Yeah.
My story, my introduction to Sex Pistols was probably around 3 or 4 years after the record came out. So we heard about it. I was about 7 or 8 years old at the time,
Mm.
and I'm like, the Sex Pistols, and one of my friends, his dad had the original, probably a Canadian copy, whatever it was at the time. I lived in Winnipeg,
Sure.
I'm like, I want this record. I want to hear what this Sex Pistols thing is all about. So I brought my little cassette recorder, Jason, over to his house, and we dropped the needle, and I put my little cassette recorder up against the speaker and recorded the whole album. And that's how I got introduced to this album. Not a very good, high quality sounding cassette that I had, but
but
I
now
didn't have.
you have the Rhino Hi-Fi.
And now I have the hi-fi, but that's how I get
Yeah.
introduced. I mean, as a kid, that's what I would do. It just, hey, I wanted to hear it. How was I going to hear it? There's no internet. You can't stream it. I don't have
Yeah.
the money to buy it. My parents didn't know Sex Pistols. They're going to buy this for
Yeah.
me at 7 or 8 years old, right? So how am I going to get it? How am I going to obtain this? And so I recorded it with my tape recorder. It was great. Listened to a lot of it. And I always liked God Save the Queen. That was definitely my favorite song, but all of them really struck me. And I mean, I didn't really understand the whole context of it at 7 years
Mm.
old, 8 years old. Now, as I got
Sure.
older, I understood it. And now that I have my own copy and I did a lot more research and really brought back some memories of me sitting there for the first time listening to this. And if anyone who's never heard this record before, I mean, do some research first and then, understand the context of everything like we discussed today and the controversy surrounding it and the impact, right? It sort of defined punk rock. It triggered bans, obscenity chargers, what huge controversy. We
Mm.
all know controversy sells, and for this record, I think it really was a positive, not a negative.
Oh, completely. Yeah. No, it was a true awakening of the potential of music. It was something where there were so many bands that started in the wake of seeing the Sex Pistols, and it really empowered a lot of people to express themselves, not just musically, but just out in society. And it's a record that can still do that.
Okay, this is a deep question for you, Jason. Now,
Mm.
would punk have the same impact without this album?
No, no, it wouldn't. It is one of the it was one of the pillars in which punk was built upon. So no, no, without no, there is no punk without the Sex Pistols.
And that's why I had to explore it at such a young age because I must have heard it from friends. I mean, again, this is before the internet. So I guess 7, 8 year olds, that's a crazy age to know about this, but I guess it was in the
Sure,
news or heard it on the radio or something like that. And I'm like, I
sure,
got to hear this record. How am I going to hear it? So we
yeah.
found a buddy that had it and recorded it, and that the rest is history. So that's how I got introduced to the Sex Pistols because of the controversy, and we talked about that before. That's what
Mm.
probably made this record so successful was the controversy and the timing of everything. Like you said, that was going on in the UK at the time. He said there's a garbage strike and a lot of other things. People are really pissed about the government and
Well, and
all of that,
also
right?
pissed off about music in general.
Yeah.
You got Rick Wakeman doing shows with the Ice Capades, and it's just it was a real dire
Like,
time. There were a few people who were tuned into a couple of bands that had happened before, early in the 70s or in the late 60s: Stooges, MC5, New York Dolls.
yeah.
Um, a lot of the garage rock stuff, a lot of the stuff featured on the Nuggets compilation, um, the Modern Lovers' first record. There's just a lot of stuff that really empowered people to want to express themselves in a way, and with, at the time, limited technique or musical prowess. It was about what you were saying,
Expression.
and it's about expression.
So if you're new to the Sex Pistols, some of the key tracks, I want to run through those. Of course, God Save the Queen. Now, during when the Queen Elizabeth was alive, there was the Silver Jubilee that they would run. That
Mm.
was banned during the Silver Jubilee, and it still hit number 2 on the UK charts at the time. So,
Well, technically number one. I think that there's
okay,
there's a lot of there were a lot of people in the music industry who did not want
a little bit of
that song
manipulation.
to be the song that defined the Queen's Jubilee, but it did.
Yep,
You
it
know,
did. So that one, but their debut single was "Anarchy" in the UK, which we mentioned, of course, all
sure.
really pissed at the government, pissed off at a lot of things. But that's really raw. Has a lot of energy in that song. I'm sure
Yeah.
you would disagree with me there.
Yeah, I mean the run of singles leading up to Never Mind the Bollocks actually coming out, you're straight out the gate with Anarchy in the UK, and I
Yep.
think it was October of '76, and then you've got God Save the Queen, then you've got Pretty Vacant, and then the single in the lead up to Bollocks coming out was Holidays in the Sun, which is one of the last two songs that band ever
Well, you mentioned
wrote.
Pretty Vacant. I mean, that was snarling, but I don't know. It's catchy.
Oh,
That
extremely,
right?
extremely, and also very much inspired by Blank Generation
Ah,
by Richard Hell.
yeah.
You know,
And then Holidays in the Sun was inspired by their Berlin
that's
trip.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
their trip to Berlin.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then pretty bold, right, back in the day in terms of controversy. I mean, their former label, EMI, they sang a song called EMI, which is on this as well. So attacking their former label.
Well, and also, there's a reference to A&M as well, who famously were originally supposed to put out the God Save the Queen single, and of which there were only a handful, I think, that still exist, where the B-side is actually No Feelings. But yeah, I think they were only on A&M for like a few days because they famously got a little drunk and got a little too rowdy at the A&M offices after signing the contract for A&M in front of Buckingham Palace.
Hmm.
So it's pretty, everything about it was inflammatory. The whole band was, shrouded in fire. I think it's something where their perspective was, we have to rip it up and start again. We truly do.
I'm curious to know where they would have gone if they would have lasted more than one album.
Well, actually, on their U.S. tour, a song that John Lydon brought to the band was the song "Religion," which was on the first Public Image Limited record. So he actually had, or at least the words to "Religion" written. Um, but I feel like some of the themes that were kind of talked about on the first Pill record may have found their way onto what could have been the second Sex Pistols record. I mean, whenever they were playing in the U.S., they had added the song "Bells and Was a Gas" into their repertoire, which is like an older song that they had. Helped Sid Vicious helped write, but there are a lot of deeper and darker themes that I think that Lydon was looking to express, and it would have been interesting to hear how those kinds of songs would have been arranged.
So one last question, and I appreciate your time. I mean, this is now, you can buy this at the rhino.com website. I believe it should be up and
Mhm.
running on their website. I think it's limited to 5,000. So there you go. Question for you now. How do you think, like, we're 50 years out? How is this? How is this? I guess, has it changed? Sort of, will this change an audiophile's mind when you listen to this record from, let's say, the original, or someone that's listened to it on cassette? Like, what are we getting out of what Kevin Gray did to this record now? What are you hearing that's different?
It's certainly the punchiest version of the record that I've heard, but also it has that certain essence that Kevin brings to records where it felt spacious
It
to
did,
me.
yeah.
Yeah.
It was punchy and it was loud. I'm not saying that Kevin cut it hot or anything like that, but I think that's just
Sure.
the way it was recorded. It was recorded loud,
Yeah,
so
it was.
you're
It's meant to be
right.
played loud.
You
It is
need to play
not a.
this loud, and it is a loud record.
Yeah.
Really quite enjoyed it. Jason Jones, Senior A&R of Rhino, thank you so much. There it is. Amazing. First punk hi-fi for audiophiles. Amazing. Rhino Hi-Fi. Love it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me,
I
Steve.
appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay, bye-bye.